A big tech company, a dark secret hiding behind the bright lights, and a young woman willing to risk everything for justice. Nothing is what it seems. But what if your boss wanted more than just hard work in exchange for that promotion? The truth is about to come out. But only the brave can see it through. If you don't want to miss true stories like this, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel. We're here every day with stories of courage, justice, and real people. Join us. Sterling Enterprises was a major player in the tech world, known for its cutting-edge projects and bold innovations. Its modern office building, with glass walls and open workspaces, buzzed with energy every single day. You'd hear laughter between lines of code, feel the excitement during brainstorming sessions, and see ideas bouncing around like sparks. From the outside, it looked like a dream workplace. But on the inside, especially in the last few months, there was a tension in the air. Unspoken, yet impossible to ignore. Among the women in the office, that tension had quietly turned into whispers, nervous glances, and discreet warnings shared behind closed doors. No one said anything out loud, but everyone felt it. It was like an invisible wall had gone up, and behind it, women were walking on eggshells. At the center of this unease was one man, Daniel Thompson, a high-ranking executive, smart, charismatic, respected for helping the company grow, at least on the surface. But behind closed doors, the things said about him painted a very different picture. Jessica Miller was a young, talented software developer at the company. She was passionate about her work, well-liked by her team, and confident in herself. But even with all her strength and drive, what happened that day shook her. She was headed to a one-on-one performance review with Daniel, thinking only about her latest project, code quality, and the progress on the new app she'd been developing. But the meeting took an unexpected turn. Daniel started off with a few shallow questions about her work. Then came the compliments, the unnecessary closeness. At first, Jessica thought maybe she was just reading too much into it. But soon it became clear this wasn't a misunderstanding. It was a pattern, one that might have already affected other women before her. And in that moment, with a cold realization settling in, Jessica made a decision not just for herself, but for all the others. She wasn't going to stay silent. Daniel leaned back comfortably in his leather chair. The faint smile at the corner of his lips said more than his words ever could. There was a tension in the air now, thick and heavy, wrapped around the silence between his sentences. "Jessica, you're doing great work," he said, sounding like he was offering genuine praise. But then his tone shifted. "If you really want to move up in this company, you'll need to be a bit more flexible." Jessica's mind went blank for a second. She stared at the water bottle on his desk, her heart pounding louder than the silence in the room. The meaning behind his words was clear, but part of her still wanted to pretend she didn't understand. Maybe, just maybe, she was hearing it wrong. "What do you mean, Mr. Thompson?" she asked, trying to keep her voice steady. But the anger and anxiety bubbling up inside her gave her words a slight tremble. Daniel's smile grew wider. There was a look in his eyes, now confident, in control. He leaned back a little more, like he had all the power in the room. "You know exactly what I mean," he said, his voice lower now, but even more forceful. "In this industry, especially for women, moving up sometimes means being cooperative, learning to accept how things work, taking certain steps together." And right then, something inside Jessica snapped. She felt small, cornered, and deeply disrespected. This wasn't just a performance review anymore. This was a line being crossed, an attack on her dignity. And for the first time, she came face to face with the ugly truth behind all those whispered rumors. When Jessica walked out of the office, she felt her knees shaking. Cold sweat clung to her forehead. Her heart was still racing, and a buzzing pressure filled her ears. As she walked down the hallway, everything around her felt like a blur. The world she knew, the one she trusted, had just shattered. Daniel's words were still echoing in her head. In that moment, she couldn't find the courage to speak up or push back. All she wanted was to get out of there. She was scared of losing her job, being labeled, not being believed. She feared that if she said something, the blame would somehow be flipped on her, that people would say she was overreacting. And that thought made her feel even more alone. In the days that followed, she avoided eye contact with Daniel, stayed out of meetings, and tried to make herself as invisible as possible. But the anger and fear inside her kept growing, day by day. Then one day, During a coffee break, she was chatting with Sarah when it all suddenly came out. When their eyes met, Jessica saw something in Sarah a weight she recognized. There was a moment of silence. Then Sarah looked down and whispered, "He did the same thing to me." Jessica froze. She wasn't alone. The following week, during a project meeting with Emily, she noticed the same cautious glance, the same tension. Emily looked around and quietly admitted something similar. Hearing that Daniel had even crossed lines in the HR department made Jessica's stomach turn. Megan, known as one of the strongest, most composed women in the finance team, surprised Jessica the most. Seeing that same vulnerability in her eyes was deeply unsettling. Megan didn't say much, but her one sentence said it all. Daniel's been doing whatever he wants in this company for years. No one's ever had the guts to stand up to him. Everything became clear. This wasn't a misunderstanding. It wasn't a one-time thing. It was a pattern, a system. And now, the silence that had held them all in place was finally starting to crack. Jessica knew then this wasn't just about her anymore. She had to do something. For all of them. One afternoon during lunch break, Jessica was sitting alone at a quiet table tucked in the corner of the company kitchen when Sarah slowly walked over, glancing around cautiously. There was a mix of fear and determination in her eyes. Leaning in, she dropped her voice to a whisper. "He did the same thing to me last month," she said. "Told me I'd never get promoted unless I played along." Jessica froze. Everything she had feared, everything she had tried to push away, was suddenly confirmed. The nightmare she thought she was facing alone was actually part of a much bigger, darker reality. She wasn't the only one carrying this weight. A few steps away, Emily gave a slow nod, her expression steady but firm. "I thought it was just me," she said quietly. "This isn't okay. We need to do something." In that moment, an unspoken bond formed between them. Three women, once isolated in silence, were no longer alone. And that quiet solidarity began to chip away at the fear that had lived in the shadows for so long. Over the next few days, they started meeting in secret. Megan was the fourth to join them. One by one, they opened up, sharing every detail of their experiences. They gathered everything they could: emails, messages, calendar invites for private meetings they never wanted, and even looked into accessing security footage from certain meeting rooms. They were careful, methodical, no room for mistakes. Because Daniel Thompson wasn't just a powerful executive, he was someone the CEO, Richard Sterling, had trusted for years. Confronting him directly was too risky. One wrong move, and they could lose everything or worse, be blamed. So, following Jessica's suggestion, they decided to compile everything they had into one document and send it straight to the top to Richard Sterling himself. The email they crafted wasn't just a complaint. It was a cry, the kind that rises after years of silence, built from courage, pain, and finally, clarity. They detailed everything: dates, conversations, the disturbing comments, the veiled threats. It was all written clearly, professionally, and within legal boundaries, but it carried the full weight of their truth. As Jessica hovered over the send button, her hand trembled. For a moment, she paused, heart pounding in her chest. Then she took a deep breath and pressed send. There was no turning back now. Richard Sterling sat frozen in front of his office screen, eyes locked on the email. He didn't move for a long time. The deeper he read, the more his face darkened, his brows furrowed, his jaw clenched, and a heavy wave of disappointment clouded his eyes. "This can't be real," he muttered to himself. For years, he had believed he was building a company grounded in honesty, equality, and respect. He had always tried to value his employees, to listen, to lead with integrity. But now he was staring at the possibility that someone he trusted, one of his top executives, had been using that power to intimidate and manipulate people behind closed doors. "I've always tried to lead this company with fairness and respect," he thought. "If these allegations are true, there's no way Thompson can stay." But he didn't want to act out of anger. A rushed decision could shake the whole company. The evidence was strong, but launching a formal investigation right away could make everything public, and that might put the victims at even greater risk. He needed eyes on the inside, someone he could trust completely. That night, sitting in his living room, his mind kept drifting back to the email. After a long breath, he stood up and walked into the kitchen where his daughter was. Chloe had just graduated with a degree in business. Smart, curious, and deeply driven by a sense of justice, She had always admired her father's work and dreamed of one day following in his footsteps. But tonight, the path ahead of her would be very different from what she'd imagined. "Chloe," Richard said, his voice more serious than usual, "I need your help with something important." Chloe turned to face him, her eyes filling with curiosity and a hint of concern. "What's going on, Dad?" Richard hesitated for a few seconds. Then, with calm determination, he said, "There have been serious accusations against someone at the company. But if I step in directly, it'll draw too much attention. I need to be sure. So, I want you to join the company like any new hire. Blend in, talk to people, find out what's really going on and tell me everything." Chloe paused. This wasn't the kind of task she'd imagined when she thought of joining the company. But when she saw the weight on her father's face, she didn't hesitate. "I'll do it," she said. "But whatever the truth is, I'm going to tell you everything. If you really want justice, you need to be ready for what that might mean." Richard looked into her eyes and felt a quiet, bittersweet pride. "I'm ready," he said softly. After a brief silence, Chloe gave a slight nod. "I'll do it," she said firmly. "We have to protect these women." The next day, under the name Claire Bennett, she stepped through the doors of the company, her heart a mix of nervous energy and focused determination. She had dyed her hair a different color, cut it straight and simple. She wore glasses and dressed neatly but subtly, just enough to blend in. This wasn't a game. This was a test. After being guided by HR to the office floor, she waited for her meeting. When the time came, she took a deep breath and started walking toward Daniel Thompson's office. With every step, the tension inside her grew. Daniel stood to greet her, Claire, as he knew her with that same confident, calculating smile. "Good morning, Claire." "Good morning, Mr. Thompson," Chloe replied, masking the chill she felt inside. At first, the interview was standard. Questions about her resume, her experience polite and professional. But as the minutes passed, Daniel's tone began to shift. "We're looking," he said, leaning forward slightly, "for someone who can really fit in with the team. Sometimes, that takes a little extra flexibility. You understand what I mean, don't you?" Chloe felt like a punch had landed straight in her gut. Her heart tightened, but she kept her expression calm. "I'm here to work hard and learn," she answered carefully. Nothing more, nothing less. A response right on the edge. But Daniel pushed on. He smiled again this time, with something darker behind it. "Great. But you know what being hardworking sometimes means." That was it. The line had been crossed. Any lingering doubt disappeared. Chloe straightened in her seat, cold fury rising in her chest. "I came here to work, Mr. Thompson. I'm not sure I understand what you're suggesting." Daniel's smile vanished instantly. The warmth on his face turned to sharp, cold tension. "Let's be honest, Claire," he said, his voice low but cutting. "If you want this job, you need to be a little more cooperative. You know exactly what I mean." Chloe stared at him without blinking, her voice steady and unwavering. "No, I'd never agree to something like that." There was a pause. The room went quiet for a moment, then Daniel's face tightened with anger. "This job might not be for you, Claire. You're making a big mistake." Chloe stood, holding her composure despite the storm brewing inside her. "Thank you for your time," she said politely, then walked out of the office. The moment the door clicked shut behind her, her heart burned not with fear, but with rage and a clear sense of purpose. She pulled out her phone, stepped into a quiet corner of the hallway, and called her father. "Dad," she said, her voice shaking but sure, "it's true. He acted exactly like they said. There's no doubt about it." As Richard Sterling's phone went silent for a moment, Chloe stood there no longer just a witness. She was ready to fight. Richard Sterling's voice on the phone was nothing like his usual calm. "Stay where you are," he said firmly. "I'm coming with the police." Chloe took a deep breath. Her hands were clenched into fists, her nails digging into her palms. The tension inside her had shifted into a laser-sharp focus. This was at the moment everything would change. Not long after, an unusual stir rippled through the front of the building. Richard Sterling entered the office flanked by two plainclothes officers, and whispers spread like wildfire through the halls. People peeked from behind monitors, stealing glances, their eyes all turning toward one place, Daniel Thompson's office. Inside, Daniel stood abruptly when he saw them. His face tensed in confusion, then turned pale with panic. "What's going on?" he demanded, his voice trying and failing to stay composed. Richard's eyes locked on Daniel's. There was no trace of friendship, no hesitation, just resolve. "Mr. Thompson," he said in a cold, steady voice, "you're being formally investigated for misconduct and abuse of power involving female employees at this company." The room fell silent, like time itself had frozen. Then, Chloe stepped forward. She slowly removed her glasses, brushed her hair back, and looked Daniel straight in the eye. "I'm Chloe Sterling," she said, her voice clear and unwavering. "I went undercover to uncover the truth." And sadly, everything they said was true. Daniel's eyes widened. His face drained of color. This is a misunderstanding," he shouted. "I was just testing her loyalty." But his words hung in the air, empty and desperate. One of the officers stepped forward, reading Daniel his rights as he pulled out the cuffs. "Mr. Thompson, you are under arrest. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you." As the handcuffs locked around Daniel's wrists, the entire office seemed to hold its breath. Employees watched in stunned silence. Some glanced at one another, others looked down, overwhelmed by what they were witnessing. Jessica, Sarah, Emily, and Megan watched from different corners, each frozen in the moment. And in that moment, the chains of fear they'd carried for years finally broke. Chloe felt a quiet relief, but also a deep ache. Justice was finally being served, yes. But the road to it had revealed how long, how deeply, this had been ignored. Richard watched as the officers led Daniel away, then turned to his daughter. "I'm proud of you," he said softly. Chloe gave a small, tired smile. No one else should ever have to stay silent again. In the days that followed, there was a different energy at Sterling Enterprises. A quiet shift had taken root, one you could feel in almost every corner of the company. The issues that had long been ignored, dismissed with whispers or silence, were finally being spoken about openly. The fear that once lingered in the air was slowly giving way to something new: trust. At the heart of that change were Chloe and her father, working side by side. Every morning, they arrived early, meeting with employees one-on-one, joining department meetings, listening closely, and trying to understand what had truly been broken inside the company. But they weren't just identifying problems anymore, they were building something new. A culture rooted in justice, transparency, and trust. New policies began rolling out one after another. Anonymous feedback systems were launched. On-site counseling became available. Regular seminars were introduced to inform employees of their rights, ensuring no one would be left in the dark again. A week later, the entire company gathered in the auditorium to meet the new executive, Mrs. Evelyn Harper. Evelyn was a seasoned professional, known in the industry for her honesty, calm leadership, and unwavering sense of fairness. As she stepped onto the stage, the room fell into a deep, respectful silence. Then she broke it with a voice that was both warm and resolute. "It's an honor to join Sterling Enterprises," she said, her eyes scanning the room. "My priority is to make sure every single one of you feels safe, respected, and valued. A real team supports each other not just in success, but in times of need. And together we will build that." The applause started slowly, then spread like a wave through the room. This wasn't just the introduction of a new leader. It was the closing of one chapter and the beginning of something new. After the meeting, Emily approached Chloe with an idea. "What if we started an employee wellness committee?" she said. "Somewhere people could share ideas, connect, feel supported?" Chloe's face lit up. "That's a great idea." When they presented it to Evelyn Harper, she embraced it with open arms. From that point on, employees weren't just being heard, they were becoming part of the solution. A few days later, during a lunch break, Chloe and Emily sat in the company's small garden cafe, sipping their coffees. The sunlight streamed through the windows, the first warmth of spring in the air. Chloe stared off into the distance for a moment, then smiled softly. "It's crazy how fast everything's changed, isn't it?" Emily nodded. "Yeah, but none of this would have happened without your courage." Chloe looked down, smiling shyly. "I just took the first step. What we've done, we did it together." They sat in silence for a moment. But it wasn't an uncomfortable silence, it was the quiet that comes after a storm. The calm that follows truth. At Sterling Enterprises, it wasn't just the projects being rebuilt anymore. It was the people. And this time, the foundation was stronger than ever. If you don't want to miss true stories like this, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel. We're here every day with stories of courage, justice, and real people. Be a part of it with us.